as a child was actually pretty chaotic, as most of the elementary schools demographic composed of Asian demographics. It was very often that many people felt that the Asian race was much more superior in intellect, and also that chances for competition were not to be passed up. As such, many opportunities for teamwork were slipped or dismissed. Now, in today's world, it falls upon the responsibility to look after one another falls upon our shoulders. As an Asian American, I feel that this country and its systems are failing its people of color. As such, I propose that Asian Americans look towards supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, based on the following key points of protesting judgment, countering deportation, and also rising against many stereotypes. I would like to move on to my first contention of how darker skin leads to prejudice. Now, according to an article in the NBC News, it was found that Asians with darker skin were more likely to be discriminated against. Through an article published on December 8, 2015, titled "New Report Discusses Impact of Mass Incarceration on Asian American Pacific Islanders Community," it was found that the Samoan youth in Oakland, California had the highest arrest rate in the city at about 140 arrests per 1,000. Now, the same could be said for African Americans. A Huffington Post published an article in June 2, 2015, titled "40 Reasons Our Jails Are Full of Black and Poor People." It was found that during the time that Chicago had their stop and frisk policy, they performed 72% of their stops on African Americans, even though the city's population only comprised of 32% of African Americans. I would now like to move on to my next point of how inadequate services have a long-lasting and damaging effect. In the case of Asians, no conformity has led to deportation. As USA Today has pointed out in their article published on April 5, 2016, for traumatized refugees, US states do little. It was found that the adaptation for these Asian immigrants to adjust to American culture depended very heavily on the success rate of the programs that sponsored them. Now, history has shown that these programs have not always worked out, as many Southeast Asians have past gang affiliations or criminal backgrounds due to their attempts of trying to fit in with American culture. Now, in a very similar case, it's found that the African Americans suffer from the same issue over deportation. A Guardian pointed out on an article published in October 3rd, 2016, titled "Black Immigrants Were Much More Likely to Be Deported Over Criminal Offenses." It was found in a research by the New York University's Law School Immigrants' Right Clinic that 76% of these African Americans that were deported from the country were done so over criminal background reasons. Now we can see, as pointed out previously in the example of Asian Americans, these people are not necessarily of bad character, rather they need a better guidance that can guide them towards a much more civil lifestyle. I would like to move on to my last point of how cultural perceptions can be a little bit damaging. So basically, Asian Americans are commonly referred to as the model minority. This means that they are the ethnicity with a higher probability of success. Now, the Atlantic found this to be untrue in an article on June 6, 2016. What was found in this article titled "Professional Burdens of Being a Model Minority," most Asian Americans were unlikely to speak out against harassment or misjudgment in the workplace because they felt that it was their duty to basically uphold this perception that Asian Americans were more submissive and much more following towards the rules and other people's standards. What was even more disturbing was the article found that shortly after African Americans became much more vocal towards racial discrimination, the racial tensions, or basically racial misconceptions, shifted over from the Asians towards the African Americans. we can see how this issue pervades throughout modern culture. Very recently, a very popular YouTuber by the name of Joey Salads did a social experiment in which he parked a car decorated with Trump stickers in a black neighborhood. What was later found was that this video was in fact actually staged. As you can see, Joey Salads over here next to a camera crew with the eventual Dougs of the equation. We can see from this how there are many people today who still like to raise common misconceptions by creating a false image of what other people would like to see or what people want to believe. In conclusion, there is still a lot of work to be done towards ensuring racial equality. Asian Americans should support Black Lives Matter once again in order to protest judgment by color, to fight deportation, and to essentially help combat this rise of bad stereotypes. I would like to close off my presentation with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. If we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. We must all come together towards each other at the end of the day in order to find a common ground and solution. Thank you.